strange things. The scientists are beginning to forecast that we're going to have one of the largest, if not the largest solar cycle directly ahead of us that we've ever had in recorded history. Does that play a part in this?
It must, Art. We've had, just in the past couple of weeks, one of the strangest huge sunspots that's ever been seen. Because it started out, normally a sunspot actually it's a much hotter area on the surface of the sun, and but it looks black and dark. This started out as a kind of ring, and it was an unusual solar phenomenon. In addition, during the last solar cycle, every 11 years, the sun's magnetic field shifts, and the North Pole and the South Pole shift, something that happens on Earth over a period of hundreds of thousands of years. But this time, it didn't do it right. It sort of half shifted and kind of stayed in not in a normal configuration, which is
that's where it is now.
Where it is now, and we've been having sunspots. Big sunspots and even an X-class solar flare during the solar minimum, which is quite unusual, just a few weeks ago. And so we're not really having a solar minimum. And some people who study the interior of the sun and the way the interior of the sun rotates have concluded that we are going to see the biggest solar max, and ironically coming, guess when, in 2011 and 2012, maybe in history. And, that gets us into a whole other and utterly fascinating area of the relationship between 2012 and all of these changes. Because how can it be that the Maya called it the way they have? And it's clear that whether it was luck or what it was exactly, we are going to be in an extraordinarily unusual and chaotic situation in 2012. There's no question.
I've always wondered, Whitley, whether the Maya actually knew that this was going to happen, or whether the guy who was making calendars just got sick of it.
I don't know the answer to that. We can talk about that in a couple of minutes. Before we go into the past, I thought it would be interesting to run down just the extreme weather events for the United States that happened in 2006. It is an astonishing story. One that we didn't talk about that we probably should is this snowstorm, 2 feet of snow hitting Buffalo in October 12 and 13. Now, Buffalo is a city that gets a lot of snow.
Oh, yes.
I might add that New York broke a 59-year record when last February, when 26 inches, nearly 27 inches of snow hit the city. Now, this year so far, no snow whatsoever in the tri-state area, which is also a record. So you have these unbelievable extremes going on. Phoenix, 143 days without rain. Before they had a downpour on March 11. And this is, incidentally, something that is going to happen somewhere in the world. Someone is going to go over the brink on drought at some point. Another thing that's happening is drowning islands. We have on Unknown Country, I think there's a story up, and if you don't see it, look on the left and click on Stories of the Week, and you will see an island off of South Carolina, which is full of expensive condos, and the beach is gone. I mean, it's just sandbags, and they're going under.
Yes, and of course, an island near Tonga that had until recently been the residence of about 10,000 people is now gone.
Is gone, exactly. And there are areas of the world that are in extraordinary danger. We've been talking about typhoons. If a cyclone comes up the Indian Ocean and hits Bangladesh just right, given the increasing rising sea levels, you could have one of the worst human catastrophes in history,
Yes.
because you could drown half that country, and that could happen virtually any time. That's real scary. That's not a place you'd want to go to on a trip.
What people don't understand, they hear that the ocean has risen by just this much and will rise by just that much. They don't understand how close in the Pacific so many of these island nations are to being underwater. Now, if you add that additional water to a large storm and storm surge, you're exactly right. You could cover half a country in water.
Absolutely, and it will happen. It will happen. And let's keep on with some of these extremes, because they are really absolutely amazing.
Go right ahead.
In November, Seattle had nearly 16 inches of rain, surpassing a record that it held for 73 years. And again, that gets back to the weird El Nino, which is working backwards. We had here in California, 140 people were killed by a heat wave in July. A couple of years ago, in Europe, there were 20,000 people killed by a gigantic heat wave that they were totally unprepared for. Yeah,
right.
Unbelievable thunderstorms hit St. Louis and hit all different areas of the country, especially in odd seasons, all during 2006. It's probably going to be the second warmest year on record, and the first 11 months of 2006 were the second warmest, I think, on record since. And the thing is, all the warmest years on record are since 2000. In other words, they're all they're all recent years, and right now, like in New York, and they have had a very warm winter up there, and yet you go out to Colorado and you wouldn't know it. You would not know it.
Now, here's something I'm worried about, Whitley, and I know you're not a forecaster and you have no way of knowing which way this totally mixed up system is going to go. Nobody knows. It's chaos. But I'm here in the desert, and as you know, in the summer, near Death Valley, our temperatures, they can hover between 115 and 120 at its worst. Now, there wouldn't be a whole lot of change that would be required in an upward movement kind of way, Whitley, to make this area uninhabitable for human beings.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. And you can have a situation that can develop I think, Art, that it's actually a little farther south of you. I think that the places to be worried about are more like Tucson and Phoenix, because they are, or if you want to be really concerned, central India has a couple of times in the past few years approached the 130 mark, which is where the human 127, 130, where the human body becomes unable to process the heat.
Right.
And and of course, if you get much above 120, as you probably know, air conditioning begins to not work and begins to fail, and it keeps the temperature down 20 or 30 degrees below what it is outside, so it's 95 inside. It's not helping a lot.
That's right.
Anyway, at those temperatures, the human body becomes unable to. A normal human being can't deal with heat. It's not built to, and people begin to die of heat stroke even sitting still and not moving in the shade.
Right.
And that we've come close to that a couple of times in India, closer than we actually have in the United States. But it could happen anywhere. It could happen. It could happen where you are, actually. I mean, it certainly
that's
could.
What I meant.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm rather concerned about that. Or it could go the other way, and this chaotic system could suddenly turn the desert into a cooler place, putting the heat elsewhere. Who knows?
Well, you had a hurricane come up through there a couple of years ago. I think you were still in the
Right.
States when that happened.
That's correct, yes.
Pieces of a hurricane came up through there. That was interesting. That was very, very interesting, the weather pattern like that. That's not something you're going to see every day, even now. But let's move on now and start to talk about what it has been like in the past. And so what I want to do is to go back 13,000 years. And now this is going to be discouraging and encouraging because we're not close to how bad it has been. And after all, despite what I'm going to talk about, life survived, and we're still here. There's a type of arrowhead called a Clovis point, which 13,000 years ago, something happened that all of the people who did Clovis points suddenly disappeared. There are no more Clovis points after that. They're called Folsom points. Now, you find something interesting when you dig down. Archaeologists looking to find the Clovis layer, they look for a little black strip in the soil called the black mat. Tell you what that is. That's a mat of algae. You find it in Illinois. You find it in Oregon. You find it in New Mexico. Where did it come from? It came from flooding when, in a matter of apparently days, the Laurentian Glacier, this gigantic glacier, actually was destroyed and vaporized and melted. The entire continent was covered with water. This water grew algae, and it slowly sank down, and that algae died on the surface when it dried out, and that's now the black mat.
What could do that?
Well, here's what it apparently was. We now have to go back to 41,000 years ago when a star went supernova. The first thing that happens is radiation moving out. The star was about 150 light years from Earth, moving out from the surface of the star at nearly light speed, goes out into the universe. 41,000 years ago, this hit. What it would have looked like to people was a huge blue-colored second sun would appear in the sky all of a sudden with no explanation. Now, the smart guys, they hid, or maybe the scared guys. Everybody who didn't hide died. In Australia, all animals over 200 pounds in weight died because they were sheeted with gamma rays and they got excessive radiation exposure. This is the time when human beings developed all kinds of different blood types. We're a very unusual animal in that most animals only have one blood type, but we've got a whole bunch of different blood types. And the reason is that this large animal, the human being, was smart enough to take shelter. And so we survived with mutations. Now, something happened a few thousand years after that, 36,000 years ago. All of a sudden, in southern France and northern Spain, adolescents, kids, a la the indigo children of today, suddenly began to paint these extraordinary paintings on caves. Now, we figured out recently, scientists figured out that these were done by adolescents because they based this conclusion on the size of the handprints they find in the caves, the positioning of the paintings, and the known size of adolescents and adults at that time. They were literally, the kids suddenly broke through to a whole new level. And you know where they were? They were on the exact opposite side of the galaxy where we are now, 13,000 years ago. And we're halfway around it, just about to cross through the plane of the galaxy, just at exactly the opposite place where we were then. The Mayan calendar predicted this in its massive long count calendar, that these changes would take place. And I submit to you that there is something bigger going on here than any of us can understand. When we talk about it on a microscope or a small level of our weather changes that we're facing right now, on a much larger level, something else, something bigger and something infinitely more mysterious is going on here.
Huh. You don't suppose that there's any relationship between that and, again, going back to the Sparks interview, the changes going on in human beings right now with respect to autism and that sort of thing. There's a basic, profound change going on, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but the Sparks interview sure turned me on to it.
You can't put your finger on it because you're inside it.
Yeah,
you can't if you're in an ocean current, flowing in an ocean current. You don't know it. You're moving, but you don't know it. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing if you're at sea and you're in a tsunami. You don't know that it's passing under you, but the people on the shore are going to find out. We're right out in the ocean of change right now, and we haven't reached the shore yet, so we don't know what that's going to be like. But I do know this, that this is, I mean, you talk about interesting times. I mean, the ancient Chinese had no idea what interesting times really were. If they had realized what it was really going to be like, they would have run like hell. They were right about that old "may you live in interesting times" thing being a curse.
Speaking of interesting times, Whitley, is there any relationship between the weather changes, perhaps what's going on with the sun, and the geologic shakeups we're going through? I mean, we just had an earthquake in Taiwan. It took out every single fiber cable, and most of Asia suddenly went dark information-wise and telephone-wise. I mean, it just cut everything off. Is there any relationship to the geologic activity?
Well, there could be. A couple of years ago, I believe it was 2 years ago, Japan was hit by a real daisy chain of typhoons, just one after another, 19 or 20 of them in a row.
Right.
And they began to have earthquakes, and some of them quite severe in Japan, because the water had literally penetrated down into and lubricated the faults.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also that the sun plays a large role in this that we don't understand yet. That heavy-duty solar activity results in, on the Earth, more volcanic activity, more unrest in the planet, and more radical weather activity. I think that there is a connection there that we don't fully understand yet.
Boy, do I ever agree with you. Whitley, we're coming up to a break, so hold it right there. Yes, the geologic activity became so intense that the Japanese began doing surveys of the bottom of the ocean, trying to figure out what was going to happen to them next. Interesting times? Ho, ho, yes, indeed, baby. We're on a ride. I'm Art Bell. Chris from Fresno, California says, Art, enough with the weather report. Boring as hell after 2 hours. Well, Chris, I suppose if you looked at it as a weather report, yes, indeed, it would be. But, gee, Chris, I want you to look carefully around you. The North and the South Pole of our world, this little world that we tread around on, are melting. Not slowly, but quickly. We're about to be navigating across the North Pole where there was ice and there is no longer ice. Chris, these are profound changes in the world. This is not a weather report. This is a kind of a summation of changes that are going on that even we cannot explain the final destination of. So, Chris, if you want to regard it as a weather report, go right ahead. But I can assure you, my friend, it's a great deal more. We'll be right back. On the other hand, Maddie in Buffalo, New York says, hey, Art, we broke another record of 55 degrees here today. and went through all the week. No snow for Christmas. As Whitley just mentioned, record snow and a storm hit here, 10/12/06. Not good for our health and the plant life here. We're going to get a lake storm, and all hell is going to break loose. Whitley?
Well, what I want to do? I want to go back again to the past, and because I'm trying to kind of bring this all together in a bigger way. And yeah, I'm not. This isn't really a weather report. And by the way, before we're finished, I also want to talk about the UFO wave, which and let's do that in the second half of this hour. And
yeah, let's. It's well underway.
There's an amazing UFO wave going on in this world that we need to talk about, and that I'll talk about a possible, an amazing event that happened in South Africa a couple of days ago that's nowhere in the media except on my website.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we got a lot to talk about in that area. So, but anyway, let's go back to the day when 80 million mammoths, mastodons, and other large animals died, and why. And now we're going back again 13,000 years. The second wave of that supernova we were talking about, the slower stuff hit. Mm-hmm. This stuff, it was traveling at much slower speeds. This is solid stuff. Things like tiny particles of iron, mm-hmm. and large pieces of comet-like material that came out of this supernova hit the Earth and the whole solar system. Now, some scientists that I'm going to be interviewing on Dreamland shortly have discovered why all of those mammoths, died with food in their mouths, and there was this sudden, unbelievable climate change taking place. And the reason that they found that these animals had tiny particles of iron embedded in their tusks and even in their bones, they literally dropped dead where they stood when these tiny, microscopic, invisible particles moving at 3,000 miles an hour came and swept over the whole continent and hit them and killed them all.
That's incredible. Incredible.
Now, I'm leading somewhere with this that gets back to the weather, so be patient with me, folks. It's fascinating in and of itself, I know, but nevertheless. The next thing that happened is something hit what is called the Laurentian Glacier, and it hit it. This is the glacier that was at that time over northern Illinois and most of Canada and the northern half of New York State and on into the north central United States. It hit with such force that flying glaciers impacted in New Mexico.
My God.
I mean, I'm telling you, all of these little craters in the Carolinas, there are over 1 million of them, called the Carolina Bays, were created by this flying ice. The central part of this glacier was vaporized literally in a day, in a moment. And this flow of water that we talked about, that covered not only North America, but the whole world. And we have memories of it. It's called Noah's flood in the Bible, and before that, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in North America, it sent a torrent of water down the central United States that was 300 miles wide. Trillions of gallons poured into the Gulf of Mexico. And I will submit that the people who really understood, and maybe not they had exquisite instincts that we have lost, and I think that's what their science was. They understood the way the universe actually works. They made these calendars that the Mayans preserved, and the extraordinary engineering abilities that we see at the great platform at Baalbek in Lebanon, at the Great Pyramids, at the fortress at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, these unbelievable achievements of engineering from the distant past came from them. They were totally destroyed by this event, but they left behind a warning. 13,000 years later, we better listen to them because they predicted what is happening now somehow.
You know, what you said hit the mammoths and the whole world almost sounds like a cosmic shotgun blast.
Exactly. Now, we're on the other side of the galaxy at this point from where that was. I mean, the star is still around. It's, obviously traveling with us. It's still approximately 150 light years away, but it's not a source of danger anymore, we don't think. There is another star, however, out there, which it's the type of star that could become a supernova. And the interesting thing about this is it's also about 150 light years away. If it became a supernova 150 years ago, we will find out about it without warning, absolutely without warning. And you have to ask yourself, did the people who developed these calendars know so much that they knew that was about to happen too? I don't know.
And if they did, how did they have that primitive knowledge? I mean, it's sophisticated on the one hand, but primitive on the other. Had to be.
I have a theory about that. I think that at that time in the evolution, the development of the human species, we had what I described a minute ago as exquisite instincts. We had an instinctual intelligence that during this catastrophe, there's a fascinating book by Barbara Hand Clow called Catastrophobia, where she talks about how what happened back then literally traumatized this species. We are a species living in post-traumatic stress disorder as a species. And that's why we don't have those exquisite instincts anymore. We're struggling kind of half blind with our modern science and we have a need to go down step by step by step. We can't just kind of let it happen in our minds the way they did. I think that's the change. I think that's the difference. And you were talking. The listener at the top of the show was talking about all the laughter in the media about the UFO sighting over O'Hare Airport.
Yes.
What's so funny? I mean, why is it funny?
The only reason it's funny to me is the irony of the people who say they have no recollection of anything of that sort. Now, mind you, these were pilots making these observations. United Airline pilots.
That's my point. That's my point.
And everybody else was unbelievable.
Apparently, an intelligently guided craft of non-human or unknown origin was seen by a large number of airline employees and pilots, and everybody's laughing about it? What's so funny, Bill O'Reilly? I'm sorry, it's not funny. It's extraordinary. An amazing event has taken place, and we have to push it away. This is our weakness speaking. Now, let's go on and talk a little bit more about, just in general, the amount of UFO activity recently. I put up on my journal, and it's not the journal that's up there now, it's the one immediately before that. If you go to Whitlick's Journal on my website and click on, you can find it immediately. It's about the fact that we are really, at this point, ready. I mean, we could handle contact with practically anybody. It's not like it was even 50 years ago when we were primitive in our understanding of this. The average person is now very used to the idea that contact of some kind, even understanding that it might not be contact with aliens. It might be that something entirely different is going on. We're able to do that. Now, could it be that somebody is there trying to reach us, even if they're from the future? Maybe they're trying to reach us more directly so that they can make more direct change and let us know what we need to do to enable them to continue to exist.
Well, Whitley, I think that I could make a case that since 1947 and accelerating to today, we have been getting prepared for contact by our own media. Now, maybe it's just simply a coincidence, a fascination with science fiction. I have no idea, but it's been movie and novel and movie and novel media preparing us for contact.
Well, that I would agree that something like that. I mean, I'm tangled up in it, frankly. Obviously, I mean,
You're part of. You're actually part of it.
Yeah, I know it. I mean, you are. Yeah, exactly. You're kind of singing to the choir here.
And I'm part of it. I'm also part of it. I mean, look at what I do for a living.
I don't think anyone could agree more. But interestingly enough, I don't have any hidden agenda. Neither do you. Nobody comes to me and says, do this and do that and now do this at all. It just happens in my life.
Right.
It just is the way my life, and the same with you. I know you too well. You don't have any secret CIA controller.
No, I know, but I've stopped trying to deny it. I did that years ago, and so if it propagates,
we are part of something. And yeah. The thing that's interesting about it is it's bigger than any factor of control. There's something else going on, this great mystery I was talking about earlier. But I want to get to, we're getting close to the top of the hour, and we're going to open the lines afterwards. I want to get to this South African crash.
Please.
It's down at the bottom of our front page, and it pretty well blew my mind when I read this. This happened on Saturday in South Africa, and in a little town, and if you go on the thing, you can see a map of where it happened, and then click on, there's a map. There's actually, they have a thing here where you can click on to the Google satellite map of the actual area, see a detailed satellite map. What happened was this: 4:33 in the morning, the administrative manager of this little town in South Africa, she begins to hear a noise that she sounded like a jumbo jet starting its engines. Mm-hmm. Then it increases until it sounds like massive screaming turbines. She looks outside and she sees that clouds have turned bright orange in color. Mm. An object looking like a comet with an orange tail shoots out of the sky and hits the ground with a huge explosion. Mm. And now, it so far, at least since Saturday, nobody has gone looking for this. And maybe they will find something, and maybe they won't. It could be a meteor. If it was a meteor, it's a very unusual meteor sound. That it's quite unusual for a meteor to sound like that. Mm-hmm. But it's possible that's what it was. However, in Russia, in Siberia, a couple of months ago, there was a very similar incident. And the government sent helicopters out to look for whatever it was that had crashed, that the villagers said had crashed, and nothing had. And they didn't find anything, and so they said it was just the villagers were all nuts or something, and they blew it off. And yet now it happens again in South Africa. And then there's this thing that happened in New Jersey, Freehold Township in New Jersey, day before yesterday, that they've been laughing about in the American media again.
Oh, yes.
Where this strange object...
Maybe some of these things, Whitley, were not crashes. Maybe they were landings.
Well, I don't know about that. They could have been, I guess. Certainly not the thing that happened in New Jersey, but goodness only knows what happened in South Africa.
Well, until you get to the smoking rock, you really can't call it a meteor.
Well, the object that hit in initially, I mean, they're going to say it's a meteor, and the thing that hit in Freehold Township. But depending on its composition, it could be. I mean, who knows what it was? It was a very strange event, and what made it strange was that the object would be traveling at such a speed, such a velocity, that it would crash through a roof of a house and embed itself in a wall. it was going faster than it would have gone if it was simply falling. In other words, it was going much faster. It had velocity of its own, and yet it wasn't hot. Showed no evidence. It shows no evidence, no obvious evidence of being scorched. So what's going on there?
I don't know, but when you add all this up, are we in the middle of or the beginning of another big UFO flap?
We could be, and if so, it's going to be just as peculiar as the other UFO flaps, where you have a combination. And if you go back to the late 40s, early 50s, when we were having these extraordinary UFO flaps, they were accompanied by a large number of seemingly meteoric events. You had the so-called ghost rockets in Sweden. You had the green fireballs in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. You had UFOs up in Roswell and up in the Pacific Northwest, and then eventually all across the United States, until finally it culminated with this extraordinary series of UFO sightings over Washington. That was the classic example of debunking when the Air Force dismissed them as swamp gas, which became a sort of international joke. But nevertheless, it has the look and feel of the same kind of thing now happening again that happened then, only this time like something that is orbiting and getting closer and closer each time it comes around. It's going to get a lot closer than it did back then. Wait and see.
Huh. So we could be at the very beginning of yet another one. I mean, it's been since, for example, the Phoenix Lights. It's been pretty quiet, but it has the feel to it right now of the beginning of something big.
It does, absolutely. It really, really does. And also another thing that we're getting, the weirdest thing on our website gets a lot of email, and I look at a good bit of it. We have a volunteer who looks at it before I do, thank God, because it gets like maybe as many as 1,000 emails, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 a month.
Oh, yes.
But one of the things that they have been sending me consistently is very, very interesting. It's coming from different people around the world, not just the United States. They are reporting seeing what some of them are describing in various ways, but some of them are describing as what look like the gateways that are opening, that they see in fields and in the sky near their houses, these angular kind of openings that seem to be openings into something else or somewhere else.
Really?
Yes, and this phenomenon has never been. People haven't said this to us before, and I've been doing this for years. This website's been up for years, and then all of a sudden we start to get a rash of emails about this. It's very strange, and it almost suggests that something is kind of very quietly and in the background, hidden from view, kind of coming into focus. A door is slowly opening.
All right, really, Whitley, hold it right there. We will go to the phones after the break. I know exactly what Whitley means. I get thousands of emails, and so we're in a position to kind of put things together. When you read email after email after email, you can tell when something's happening and when something is coming. We'll be right back. Our memories hoard is very short and convenient indeed. The poles of the world are melting, and they call it a weather report. Oh, God. Whitley Strieber is here. He's my guest. He and I did a little book that became a movie that kind of kicked all this off in a way. And many of them are still kicking us. At any rate, I've had Whitley now for some time. So in a moment, it's your turn. Any questions? And there's quite a spectrum to talk about, from the Greys to the current UFO flap, if that's what it is, and it certainly appears to be, to a great deal of what he's covered about the climate. He's all yours, coming right up. George is taking a well-deserved day or two off. and I am filling in this night. My name is Art Bell. On the line with me is Whitley Strieber, and we're about to go to the phones if you're ready. Anything else you want to get in now, Whitley, just before?
Well, no, let's go right to the phones.
To the phones we go. Let's make it Tricia. How about Tricia in Northern California? You're on with Whitley.
Yes, hi, good evening. As far as the weather goes, you certainly have my attention, and I was wondering if you could recommend a website I can go to prepare my family for a life without water and electricity and a grocery store. And
I don't mean to laugh. That would be quite a website. Whitley?
Well, anyone who lives in now this is not in any kind of an earthquake zone or a zone that is area that is prone to bad weather should certainly have basic emergency supplies. In our place in California, we've got water to last for a week and food supplies. I mean, nothing special, just things we bought at the grocery store. And, we have a crank radio. Actually, it's a C crane radio, to tell you the truth. And that kind of thing here. And everyone should have that. I think anyone who lives in hurricane areas or should have such supplies available in their car in an earthquake zone like she is in California, an area in Pacific Northwest, which now appears to be prone to very severe storms. You should be able to expect to live without power and perhaps without access to water and food, or certainly food, for at least 4 or 5 days, anywhere.
wow. Well, what kind
And I don't think I wouldn't worry about a website, because the Internet isn't going to be something that's going to be available under those conditions.
No, I was thinking of buying it now, like a survivalist.
Yeah, well, that's the advice he gave you, ma'am, and it's very, very good advice under any conditions. Certainly, it's not going to get you through a permanent, severe change of some sort, but the period that we're in right now is going to be a period of unpredictable, severe weather, and it's going to produce hardships. It's already doing so. So the kind of preparation Whitley just talked about is right on the money. Wild card line, Mara Lee in Arkansas. You're on with Whitley.
Thank you. I want to know if he's familiar with the quote that says, when Jesus Christ will return, he'll bring the heavenly hosts with them, and that might be the Ashtar Command, who has indicated they're standing by in the heavens to evacuate humans and animals in case of a pole shift.
All right, Whitley, there is the religious take on all this.
Well, if pole shift, interestingly enough, she brings up quite a fascinating point, because supposedly about every 250,000 years, there is a magnetic pole shift on planet Earth. Not as far as we know, an actual turning over of the planet, but the magnetic pole shifts, and for a period of time lasting upwards of anywhere from a few years to 1,000 years, we don't really know, the magnetosphere of the Earth is in chaos. Now, we know that in the past, this has not been associated with big extinction events, meaning that when this happens, solar energy is not so bad that it reaches the surface of the Earth. But we're living in a very different world now. We are living in a world that is absolutely dependent upon long electrical lines, sensitive electronic circuits, and so on and so forth. If we didn't have a magnetic field to guard us from solar radiation, to say the least, this society as we know it could not function, not for long. It would begin to break down in all kinds of complicated and eventually catastrophic ways. That said, the pole is in the process of shifting. Mm-hmm. Scientists believe that it's a very slow process, that, in other words, that it'll take at least 1,000 years for it to be in a state of chaos. But we don't actually know whether or not that is the case. So, yes, that's yet another thing that is changing now. We are in the middle, or at the beginning phases, and have been for 200 or 300 years, of one of these periodic earthly magnetic pole shifts.
All right, let's go west of the Rockies to Ann in Walnut Creek, California.
Hi.
You're on
Hi,
with
Art,
Whit.
and
Hi.
hi, Whitley, and I'm so glad to hear the two of you tonight. Absolutely fascinating. I would like to ask a question I've been wanting to ask for a long time. I'd like to ask you to bring in another element into the discussion to connect the dots between HAARP and everything you've been talking about. How HAARP may have been playing a role, maybe, could play a role for good or bad, and whether anything that that's happened could possibly be attributable to HAARP, and last of all, is there any way you can think of that if we were in a electromagnetic celestial pickle that HAARP could actually help?
All right. HAARP is an interesting subject, Whitley. It's been, as you know, taken over by DARPA. It's cranked up to incredible levels, and it's playing with the ionosphere. So,
right. Yeah, HAARP is using essentially microwave energy or a similar energy to heat the ionosphere with unknown results. And I can assure you that they have never done any kind of environmental impact analysis of that at all.
Right.
And what HAARP may be used for, supposedly, it is used to create a reflective area where they can reflect radar waves off of it and look down across the horizon of the Earth, use the radar to look down across the horizon of the Earth to the other side of the planet. What it's actually used for, given that we have satellites that now blanket the entire planet, making such a process unnecessary, what it's actually used for is an entirely different question. I don't know. Dr. Nick Begich has got a lot of very interesting theories about that, and I do think this, and this is just generally true, where the secrets start, the freedom stops. And we absolutely, this government of the United States is got a cancer. It's the cancer of secrecy. This cancer has been growing ever since World War II and after World War II. Instead of backing away from secrecy that was so necessary during wartime, we founded the CIA and we embraced it. Harry Truman said the CIA was the worst mistake he ever made. Dwight Eisenhower warned us against this malicious military-industrial complex, as he described it. And we now are suffering the consequences of that. Every American should have clear information about what things like HAARP are, what they do, and what their potential hazards are. We do not have that information.
No, we don't. We're looking at a chaotic system getting completely out of control. So, how to attribute any single influence on it is just virtually impossible. Wildcard line, Elizabeth, you're on the air with Whitley.
Hello, Art. Hello, Whitley. I would like to ask you about these people that could help us stop this from happening, how we could get to them, how we could get them to listen to us. I have an idea. For one thing, my preacher, it's a little embarrassing to talk about my ideas, but he said the way to measure a man's maturity or woman's maturity is by their love toward other people. So if we could get these people that can help us to stop the global warming, to realize that.
I'm confused. What people are you referring to?
Like Jay Sekulow, who changes laws. Well, to change the subject, I would like to say that I heard I talked to a girl yesterday about this documentary that she watched, and well, the Earth in the United States split in half and became two islands because of the glaciers and the flood, and it cracked. And I would like to know if he knows anything about that.
All right, let's hold it there, Elizabeth. The U.S. Cracking in half?
Well, I think that it would be more productive to talk about, first of all, I don't think that is anything like that is going to happen. I do think, though, that there is an increasing potential for earthquake in the central United States being generated by the New Madrid Fault, which in the early 19th century created a tremendous earthquake in that area and is still very unstable. And unfortunately, it's an area of the country that is totally unprepared for earthquakes. It's absolutely unprepared. The other thing is this, that there is a lot of study needed to understand what happened to cause these recent, the gigantic earthquake a couple of years ago at Christmas time that caused the tsunami, the 8.5 earthquake off the coast of New Zealand that preceded it by a few days, the massive earthquakes that occurred in northern Siberia recently, and just what is causing these very large earthquake swarms that keep appearing, and does this have significance? In other words, can other areas, like it was recently announced that I believe by NOAA or by the U.S. Geologic Survey, or it may have been the state of California, that there was a relatively high likelihood that the San Andreas Fault was going to give away in its northern half, jeopardizing San Francisco and potentially the Sacramento Delta, which feeds water to the whole southern half of the state. So, how this is the sort of thing that we don't understand well enough yet. And she brings up a point, as far as the United States itself cracking in half, I think basically just don't worry about it. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, that probably would have been. Although the New Madrid Fault is placed in an interesting position to, if it was big enough, I suppose, accomplish roughly that, but not to worry.
It could have a 7.5 or bigger earthquake generated by that fault. It's a strong enough, big enough fault to do that.
Mm-hmm. Bob in Burbank, California. Your turn with Whitley.
Looks like I broke the cycle. All your calls for females up to now.
Yeah, you're right.
I noticed that.
I'm thinking it's a conspiracy. I'm not getting on tonight. But anyway, Whitley, it's always nice to hear you on the radio. And,
well, thank you.
Yeah, and just going back to the UFO thing, I've been investigating UFO phenomena for many years. I've worked in aviation for 11 years. I used to fuel aircraft, tow aircraft, and work on the tarmac for many years. I've seen weird anomalies, but back to the, Chicago, the UFO out there, I did some research on that, and I received an email of the object. It was a black triangle, and these discs were coming out of the bottom of it from what I heard. And let's think about this for a minute. It's when this happened, it's a few months, a couple weeks ago, whatever, 2006. Now, almost everybody in the United States has a cell phone, and 90% of all the cell phones have cameras in them. Now, tell me that there's not one person out there, out of those people on the tarmac, that didn't take a picture of a UFO with their cell phone that was hanging around in the air for about 10 minutes. Now, I think we should actually try to retrieve some of those photos, unless the government came in there under national security and said it was some sort of government project, which they always do. When I was working at Lockheed, when we had UFOs flying around there, little objects, I always said it was national security and just blamed it on that, and everybody just sort of shut up. So
sure. Well, caller, you just said, you said a moment ago that, I just lost my train of thought. What did you say? Oh, yes, you referred to Chicago. Now, I wanted to ask you if you also feel that we're at the beginning of another UFO flap, a big period of time when we're going to get a lot of sightings, if not a landing.
You're absolutely correct. The UFO flap happens to happen on a 20-year cycle, I've been noticing. And we are coming into that flap right now. And what's really amazing about the UFO phenomenon is you could actually when there's a major UFO sighting in a particular area, you could usually link it to some historical event. Like one of the largest historical human events in our existence was World War II. They were everywhere. When there's major earthquakes in a local area, there are UFOs seen everywhere. When there's a major catastrophe, they're there. Some of them are probably documenting historical events. Others are actually trying to prevent events from happening. I've worked with undercover. I'm a contractor who works undercover for a couple of companies, and I was in downtown LA when we got word of a nuclear weapon being released in downtown Los Angeles. I was with some agents out there, and I'm telling you, when I was out there, there was a UFO right in LA when we were looking for this. They thought it was the key word. It was near the library. It was a building 2 blocks across from the library. There's supposedly been snuck in a small nuclear device on the 66th floor of a building. They're going to airburst it and destroy LA. At this point, I swear to God, there's a cylindrical silver object the size of a small car floating. It looked like a balloon. It was hovering against the building right where this weapon was supposed to be placed. The air unit that we had out there, an FBI helicopter, approached it and nearly crashed when it saw this UFO.
All right. Well, consider for a moment that all of this began shortly after we detonated the first nuclear weapon in the world. And it's been going on ever since. And as he points out, Whitley, it has occurred around major events, around major military moves. We've had these flaps.
Yeah, that's very true. And, in fact, the first ones occurred before that. It occurred during World War II when we had the Foo Fighters and other... and the
major event, a war.
Yeah, and the great Los Angeles UFO event where they opened fire on a UFO over Los Angeles during the early part of the war years. So, incidentally, getting back to the United incident in Chicago.
Yes.
They've been researching on my website to see if
what
there's
happened?
anything, if there's anything that anything more. And we did find something interesting that on December the 4th, the FAA issued an information for operators saying that TAs, or phantom returns on collision avoidance equipment in airplanes had been occurring, and they attributed it to returns from U.S. Navy craft from a certain type of transponder on U.S. Navy craft, but they do comment in it that these returns...
Whitley, hold the thought. I'm sorry, I've got to do it right here. I'm Art Bell. Indeed, here I am, a country where they turn back time. They are out there, and I suggest that most Americans, when you get the opportunity, go and visit one. The Year of the Cat. That song just has a great deal of meaning to me. Good morning, everybody. I'm Art Bell. Whitley Strieber is my guest. We're, what is it we're doing? We're doing a special weather report, and we'll be right back. When I had to rudely interrupt you because of the clock, Whitley, you were talking about a notice to air traffic types about what was going to be appearing, almost as though they knew.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the cue at the bottom of the hour.
That's all right.
I was talking about an FAA notice about phantom signals occurring on collision avoidance equipment in planes, and they were referring primarily to Lindbergh Field in San Diego, and saying that interestingly enough, that the source of them was unknown, because the naval ships that might have been the source of these things that were in the harbor had the transponders that could have caused this turned off. And of course, no one makes any claim whatsoever about this, about it being about what else might be causing this. But you have to think that now maybe they're out there trying to land, and it didn't work in San Diego, so they tried Chicago.
Let's go all the way to the other side of the world. Shane in Melbourne, Australia.
Hello, Art. How are you? It's nice to speak with you.
Quite well. Thank you.
You speak very differently back in the Kingdom of Nai as opposed to the Philippines.
You think so?
Most definitely. It's a two-part question. How do you feel about Robert Felix's take on it, where he feels that we're entering global warming to be followed by an ice age? And I accept that climate change is real. What possible solutions? I mean, you've either got Shelley Yates, who's doing a fire up the grid on the 17th of July, 11/11, with a mass consciousness experiment, or else you've got Richard Hoagland's hyperdimensional physics solution. So,
Okay, I'll tell you. Well, you'll get both points of view. My point of view is that it is changing and that there's not a damn thing we can do about it. Whitley has a slightly more optimistic point of view. Whitley?
Well, it's true that I do have the problem of being a little bit optimistic because I look at human history and I see all of the things that have gone wrong across the span of time that we have been on this earth, and we're still here. And I just have a feeling that, yeah, I agree with you, Art. I think a lot of this is going to unfold, and there's not a lot we can do about it. And there will be many people who suffer because of it. But in the end,
Yes.
There'll be three species that are still here: the roaches, the rats, and us.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I'm not suggesting that the world is about to be wiped out. I'm just saying these changes are coming. Correction, these changes are occurring now, and I do not believe we can stop it.
Well, I agree with you there, and I guess my optimism comes from I'm talking about our ability to cope with them. We can reduce our carbon dioxide emissions quite easily.
Yes.
The big lie that we can't do that is the lack of leadership has been unfortunate because if you go on Unknown Country and you go to the Quick Watch and you scroll down, there's a list of things that you could do that as I said, if 100 million people did them, it would completely change the whole carbon dioxide profile of the atmosphere inside of 10 years. And a lack of leadership is why that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. They're not even hard. But that's going to change Art's right, you're right. It has changed the larger picture. It's too late for things like the Gulf Stream. That is going to happen. Whatever its consequences are, we don't know. But it is going to happen. The fundamental way the ocean currents work now is going to change. And it's going to change probably in our lifetimes and could be really any time. And we're going to live with the consequences of that, whatever they may be.
West of the Rockies, you're on from Anchorage, Alaska, Kat with Whitley.
Hi, it's great to be speaking with both of you. Whitley, I wanted to ask you about something I saw, actually, it was 10 years ago, but the stuff you were talking about with gateways opening up reminded me of it. I was driving between Visalia, California and Fresno, California with a bunch of friends, and it was at night, and there are no street lights out there, just the headlights, so it was very dark sky, and all of a sudden the sky basically turned to daylight in kind of a slow flash and then turned back to blackness. But we had time to, we were probably going 50 miles an hour and we broke entirely to a stop. Everybody in the car saw it and was screaming, and I talked to people for months after that to see if I could find anyone that knew what had happened. But I only ever found one other person that remembered it. I'm wondering if you know about this kind of phenomenon, or if you think it's related.
Well, it's sometimes related to that can be a meteor, a large meteor, especially if it was cloudy, burning up and I mean, especially if it was a clear night, burning up and they can
backlighting the clouds. Really,
yeah, it can be very dramatic, that kind of flash. at the same time, it could have been something completely unknown. The interesting thing about it was that if it was that big, it was a big energy release of some kind that caused it, because you don't light up the whole night sky like that and make it turn into daylight for a few minutes without. It was no flashlight, and it was nothing from an airplane. Let me put it that way. It was either a natural phenomenon or a UFO.
All right, to Florida, and Stan, you're on with Whitley Strieber.
Yeah, welcome back. It's great to hear you again. Whitley, good to talk with you. Are you familiar with the UFO incident in 1973 in the middle of the Atlantic?
Enlighten me.
I was an air traffic controller for the U.S. Air Force at Lodges Field in the Azores during the Arab-Israeli War. And we were supplying airplanes and munitions and all kinds of supplies to reinforce the Israel during that war. And everything had to go through the Azores because our European partners told us we couldn't fly through there. And during the entire airlift, we had no less than one and sometimes multiple UFO visits every day.
Wow.
I mean, we were sending out, they were following our jets coming in on final approach. And, I literally several times turned jets around to try to chase them.
Sir, is there anything recorded of this? Are there any records of all this that a person could get? Freedom of information, whatever?
I have no idea. I know they sent somebody in from the Pentagon to talk to all of us afterwards.
Oh.
If you can look up something called Operation Green Light.
Green Light. All right, you said they sent somebody in to talk to you. What did that somebody say?
They were asking us what all we saw. I mean, they weren't really harming us. They were just, it was more like they were trying to figure out or keep an eye on what we were doing. And we knew they weren't the Russians, because we knew where all Russian bears and their spy planes and, trawlers and stuff were. I mean, we were sending out, you know what a P-3 Orion is?
Yes.
It's a sub-hunter.
Yeah, sure. And it's a plane.
Yeah, and they have all kinds of, Navy, but they have all kinds of electronics for, detecting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's Operation Green Light. We were
and something of this magnitude. I mean, if you had objects following, military craft, there would have been a lot of reports filed, and if we know the timeline and where, people can file information, freedom of information requests, and we can get information on this. So, again, when was it, please?
It was during the Arab-Israeli airlift in the Azore Islands. It's been so long, I don't remember the dates. I know it was in 1973.
Okay.
And, like I said, during the entire airlift, we had not less than one UFO, and a lot of times several every day. Now, one of the interesting things is, a buddy and I, we took my camera and went out to the end of the island one evening to see if we could get a photograph, and we were met by security police that turned us around and told us to go back. And
all right, I'm going to do a little bit of research on this. It's a very, very, very interesting story, and again, there should be a lot of records available. A lot of times, the information is good for the plucking if you know where and when, and now we do. So let's see what we can do. Fascinating, huh, Whitley?
Indeed, it is. And I know of another incident that I've done a little bit of research into that happened during the Korean War in the Pacific, where a large cylindrical object appeared over a carrier battle group and was absolutely an awesome experience. And the reason I'm pretty sure it happened is that we received so many letters from so many different people. We received letters from two different people who had been in the carrier battle group. Well, one of them a radar operator, and one of them an officer on one of the support ships, who I don't believe were connected with each other in any way. The letters came about a year and a half apart, and we have them both. And it was apparently a really remarkable incident. So these things do happen, military people, and no question about that.
All right. Again, to another part of the world, Joseph in Alexandria, Egypt. Hi there.
How you doing, Art? Nice to speak to you. And to Mr. Whitley, my grandmother, actually my great-grandmother, lived to be 105. She was illiterate. However, she memorized the Bible, the entire Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. It was a remarkable woman. She had a prediction. She always said about the end days. It's a cosmic event. Now, she was talking also about the 11,000-year cycle. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And that's what it is. She said the planet Earth goes into rejuvenation like a woman after a childbirth. In the Egyptian time, after a woman have a child, they go and dip her in milk, if you're familiar with that. And this is the same thing as planet Earth right now. We're going into a freezing era, and that's rejuvenation in a way. Eskimo, to me, it applies because a cold kills a lot of viruses. If you know that, and maybe that's what it is. That's a cycle, and that's a rejuvenation to planet Earth with all the contamination that human, and actually, I don't contribute that entirely on human. All
right. Well, thank you for the call all the way from Egypt. Clearly, we are on the cusp, the edge of something. Something big is close.
Let me just deepen the mystery a little bit. And here's something fascinating. The Old Testament was written during the sign of the Ram, the 2,300-year approximate cycle, that astrological cycle when which is that we're entering the age of Aquarius now. That was the age of Aries, and the ram is the most mentioned animal in the Old Testament. Then we moved to Pisces, and when we moved to Pisces, the New Testament appears, and what is the symbol, of course, of Christ in the New Testament? The fisherman. And the fish was the early symbol of the Christians. Now we move into the age of Aquarius. What happens to an Aquarius? Well, it's called Aquarius because the water in which the little fish has presumably been swimming is poured out onto the land. Fish has got to learn to walk and to breathe on land because he's no longer supported by the water, which has been the source of his life before. And somebody knew all of this. That's why the Bible is related to the huge astrological structures that are beneath the surface. It's why the Sphinx, if Graham Hancock is correct, and I'm pretty sure he is, if you go back to the time of Leo 10,000 plus years ago, you'll find the constellation of Leo rising behind the Sphinx every night. And supposedly the Sphinx is only a couple of thousand years old. Robert Schock has said it's more like it is 10,000 years old.
I take it you heard the program with Graham?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
and I know Graham too.
Yeah.
So anyway, there is a huge structure here, a great plan, an enormous mystery, and those of us living in this time, which is obviously an end time of some sort, but like all endings, it's also a beginning.
That's right.
We are very attuned to this extraordinary mystery. That's why there's a huge spiritual awakening taking place on Earth right now, on a religious level, and from the most conventionally religious people to the most unconventionally there is this sense of something great in our presence, in the air, all around us and within us. And it's true because there is a change of age taking place, and we're part of it.
All right. Maybe one more. Lloyd in Calgary, Canada. You're on with Whitley.
Hello, Art. Geez, good to talk to you. About 15 years I've been trying to get on here. Holy.
Welcome.
Finally got through, and Whitley, for sure. I got a couple of questions and a little bit of a commentary. So first I'll throw the questions out. I would like to know what Whitley thinks of the opposing theories, I guess, of global warming, in as much as it's a solar cycle, or I have heard another that says that it's we're currently suffering a bombardment of neutrinos that are heating the core of the Earth. And
that's an interesting question, because there is a lot of change in the radiant atmosphere around our planet taking place right now, and there is also change taking place within the core of the planet, and we just don't understand this at all. But it may very well relate, and it may explain, for example, why it is, like off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, and this could be a reason why we were talking earlier about this El Nino ended up going backwards there, and it is that there is a large area of the land area beneath the ocean that is warm, that is heating for some unknown reason. There's a hot spot near Santa Barbara, in the mountains near Santa Barbara, California, too, where it's just, there's a lot of heat coming up out of the ground, and we don't understand why.
There's an awful. That's right, Whitley. There's so much we don't understand. One thing is clear, though: we're out of time. I mean, we're just flat out of time. The latest book.
It's an exciting time to be alive, whether we're out of time or not.
It is. Your book is The Grays. Latest is The Grays, right?
That's right.
All right, buddy. Listen, I've got to cut it off here. I'm sorry. We could go on and on. Whitley, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And good night, everybody. I'll take a day off myself, I think, and be back for Saturday and Sunday. I'm Art Bell from the High Desert